The Higher Ed Marketer podcast is sponsored by the Zemi app, enabling colleges and universities to engage interested students before they even apply.
You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, a podcast geared towards marketing professionals in higher education. This show will tackle all sorts of questions related to student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and so much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where the industry is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. Myself, Troy Singer from Think Patented, each week partners with Bart Kaler of Kaler Solutions to bring you conversations with higher ed marketers that we feel the entire higher ed marketer community can benefit from. Today, we talk to Ben Congleton from Olark about live chat solutions for higher ed marketing and how it can work for your college.
Yeah, Ben does a great job of kind of explaining the benefits of live chat. I think we all have experience with customer service and doing different things online and leveraging live chat solutions, whether you're doing an order with Land's End or any other e-commerce platform. We're pretty familiar with that, but live chat isn't something that a lot of schools have implemented yet. A lot of, I think, misconceptions about it are out there. And so Ben does a good job of kind of deconstructing some of that, helping us to understand a little bit about what the commonalities between those solutions are, as well as just to kind of demystify a little bit the difference between, live human chat versus what's being known as chat bots. And so I think this is a great episode for anyone who's looking at ways to better service their audiences, whether it's enrollment, whether it's development, whether it's, internal students. There's a lot of really good conversation around that today.
Here's our conversation with Ben from Olark. It's our pleasure to welcome Ben Congleton to the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. He is the CEO of Olark, which is a live chat solution for higher ed marketers. And before we get into the advantages and some of the best use cases for live chat solutions, would love for you, Ben, to introduce yourself and how did you come up with this wonderful solution for higher ed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Ben Congleton. I'm CEO and co-founder of Olark. I've been sort of building software and this as an entrepreneur for about 13 years. I started Olark basically leaving a PhD program at the University of Michigan. So I have I have a deep higher ed roots. So it's exciting to be here. My dad's a professor. My sister's a professor. My brother-in-law is a professor. So like a higher ed is a place that I feel very comfortable in. And so I guess your question was sort of like, how do we get this thing moving? How do we get this started?
Yeah, maybe your beginnings.
Yeah, sure. So the beginnings, the early beginnings is, I actually, used to run a web hosting company like in the mid 90s. And back then, the best way to communicate with the customers on our website was via chat. And in the mid 90s, a company kind of bought our live chat provider and then sort of shut down the SMB product and moved it into a Fortune 500 product. And we searched around and searched, and we could not find anything that really worked for sort of our small teams, that wasn't designed for like Fortune 500 call centers. Fast forward 2009, I'm working on this PhD. I'm sitting in a PhD seminar class, reading an article by Shoshama Zubrov. I remember this about disintermediation, and you're thinking like, like if everyone's going to start selling and moving all commerce to the web, how are we going to communicate? And I looked back at my time in 2000, in the mid 90s, and thought like, okay, like chat worked pretty well for us, but it seemed to just go Fortune 500, went to like AT&T and Comcast. Like what happened to everyone else? And I looked around and there wasn't really a solution out there like for non-giant call centers. And, I learned a lot, I had a computer science degree, had a business degree, I was working on this PhD and was like, I think we could maybe build the thing that like we needed 10 years ago. And we started building it. Some of our earliest customers were university libraries and university professors. It wasn't maybe necessarily the best use case, but we started off there and then started seeing a lot of e-commerce businesses use us, governments and software companies, and the company kind of exploded and grew from there.
Isn't that fascinating that, you and I talked, in the pre-interview a little bit about the idea that I remember back in the 90s, we were using ICQ. I think it was some kind of little, messaging software. And that was kind of, people were using AOL and all kinds of things at that time. And it's funny how, it kind of went away for a while. And as you said, kind of went big corporate. And now it's coming back. And it's funny that, my son, who, he's 22 now, he wasn't born until 1999, 2000. I think that messaging is kind of their natural way of going about things. And so I think it's fascinating that it's kind of come full circle. But now, especially post-pandemic, talk a little bit about that. I'm sure a lot of things have happened during the pandemic that kind of, required even more of this type of need.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating, right? Like, I think a lot of us kind of grew up, my generation grew up like SMS, texting friends, et cetera. Now you have Facebook Messenger. Now you have people using Instagram messaging on the side, TikTok, like short, rapid text communication, right? Like is happening constantly, happening everywhere. And what's interesting to me is, we've worked with higher ed for many years, but, around the beginning of the pandemic, we started to see like a lot more demand for this kind of solution. I think a lot of it was that there was a lot of systems that were built for in-person communication that just broke down when everyone was remote. And so we saw, quite a few universities reaching out to us, probably, early 2000, et cetera. And some of our existing customers were saying like, hey, how else can you help us? Like, we've been working with you guys for a while. And through that process, I looked at the space a lot more. I started, talking more deeply to our higher ed customers and understanding, some of the challenges that they were facing. And I don't know, I got excited because, I now could go kind of bring those Thanksgiving dinner time conversations back to, what I get to do every day. And so we saw people we aren't doing campus tours anymore. Like, how do we engage with students who are browsing our websites as maybe their first interaction with us as a school? Or like, okay, we have some admitted students, but they're not on campus right now. For example, University of Oregon started off using us in both admissions and housing. And what they learned is basically when someone gets their housing set up, they're going to show up. Like the summer melt is like not a factor once they have a place to stay. And so they started putting RAs and some of their housing groups on chat. And so it's been interesting to kind of watch this sort of customer service focus that we saw happen in e-commerce and in service businesses move into universities when most of the interaction is happening via the website. Like basically your enrollment yield funnel has a huge piece of it that is people interacting with a website, not picking up the phone. And that's been kind of an exciting problem to work on because I've been working on that problem in B2B for a long time. And now it's kind of come full circle. It's pretty exciting.
It is really exciting. And I think it's interesting. We've got a guest coming up in a couple of weeks with Stephanie Geyer she used to be at RNL. And so she was kind of the author of E-Expectations Report. And their most recent one last year was saying that, the website is the number one place that students go to find out information about starting a college. And it's the number one place that people go to decide on the content is what that drives them and make their decision, even beyond, the counselors and everybody else. And so I think it's so important to realize what tools can we put on that website where everybody's already going to make that as frictionless as possible. And I love the idea that chat is one of those tools because we're so used to it. We go to any other, e-commerce platform and it's like, oh, I've got a problem. I'm going to click on the chat and I'm going to type and talk to somebody and get it solved because I don't want to hang out on hold for 3 hours. And I don't want to, not get my problem solved. And I'm not going to email somebody and wait 3 days. I just want to get it taken care of. And I love the fact that human chat can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gen Z is not going to pick up the phone when they have a question, like, browsing your website. They're not going to post a message in your Facebook group, right? And they're unlikely going to send you an email. So I think like the point is you need to be there where the person is, whether they're on a mobile device or whether they're, sitting in front of their computer or on a tablet, you need to be there so you're not interrupting flow so that you can just sort of help people move through that journey.
I think you're exactly right on that.
With that, There are a couple of different chat solutions out there. Your platform is a live chat solution, but they're also what people commonly refer to as bots. And I'm sure there are advantages and disadvantages to them both, but if you can kind of help us think through that and point some of those out and go into this discussion for others that are maybe contemplating making a decision of a chat solution in the near future.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think there's a big trend, right, of seeing chatbots, like kind of I would call it basically just adding automation to some sort of workflow. We saw this happen in kind of calling up Comcast or AT&T many years ago when you got these deep phone trees and had a lot of questions. You're starting to see more of this happen on websites. And the reason this happens is because, in general, salespeople are very good at selling a solution that's like, hey, AI will answer all your questions. You don't have to staff this. You don't need people anymore. And it's a lot easier for someone to say, yes, give me that thing. I don't need to spend money on people. I don't need staff. I don't need to staff it, than it is to say, okay, let me figure out the system that's going to provide incredible service to the people that I'm trying to serve. So if you're like, a small liberal arts college and you're thinking like, okay, like I can just put this little bot thing on here and it'll answer everyone's questions, that seems a lot easier than figuring out, how you work with marketing, how you work with your admissions team, how you work with other parts of your school to actually provide incredible service and answer questions that the students might have. So like the story is compelling about why people might choose that. The challenge, I think, with bot only or pure bot is that most of the time that people reach out and want to communicate with someone at an institution, it's when they have an exceptional case. And it's when like they are trying to get something deeper than a question that they could ask Google or a question that they could ask Siri. And you could think about Siri as kind of like some of the best AI out there, or Alexa, or these virtual assistants. And imagine how much money like Amazon and Google and Microsoft are spending developing these personal assistants, and think about all their shortcomings. So I think, bots are useful. And we do some of that natural language processing, bot automation stuff. But my story has always been, as a school, you're basically trying to create belonging, and you're trying to stand out from everyone else that is in that playing field. So you're not trying to commoditize the interaction with your institution via your website. What you're trying to do is automate away some of the really simple things, maybe some of the simple Google query style questions, and then get over to someone who can deal with the nuance and really express to that student or the prospective student what makes you guys different, like how you're able to help someone move through a complicated financial aid process, or how you're able to answer a couple questions in that application process that reassure them that you're going to be there for them once they show up at the institution, and you're not just handing them a bot that refers them to a phone tree or an email address, which I've seen done so many times, and it's just disappointing.
It really is, and I find myself I love Amazon. I've been an Amazon, they now tell you Amazon, customer since, for me, it was like 1995, 1996. And I really like it. But the thing that frustrates everything about it is that when I have a question about something and I go to their customer support, it does do the automated bot. And half the time I've already done all the research to figure out what I need. I'm going to the bot, I'm going to the chat because I can't find it on my own. I mean, most people I think are pretty self-sufficient. And I think the challenge in customer service, whether it's Amazon or whether it's anybody else, is making it so that the customer feels good about their experience with you at the end of the day. And right now, I never have felt good about the experience that I've had with Amazon, because it just goes in circles. And finally, you might get someplace where you get down to somewhere that you actually get a human on there, but it takes forever. And I know that they do that because call centers cost money. They charge based on the minute, based on the engagement. And so I understand that. But from a college standpoint, like you said, from a liberal arts, small, medium-sized school, we can't afford to do that. I mean, we've got to be living our brand out all the way down to the way that we do chat. And if we are selling, if we see on the page, hey, we're all about community, you're not a number here, all this, but yeah, click on this chat bot and we're going to make you a number. We're kind of against the brand on that. And so I love the idea that you guys are leveraging AI when it makes sense, but it's not replacing that human relationship. And I think that's one of the dangers And I'm guessing you do too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, I think, when you think about, Olark's philosophy and how we sort of approached bots, for example, like we've always, we've been 13 years in the live chat industry and the live chat business. So we built, a very robust, solution to help that, route to the right person. So for example, we've done work with Slate recently, and that's been pretty exciting where we can route to the admissions counselor assigned to the person, the student, when they come out and ask a question, or, really thinking about like that, complete experience of like, knowing other communication that someone has with the student when they come into chat. I think there's a lot of options to sort of think about this holistic experience for the student that really is trying to create that belonging. And AI and automation is a piece of that, but it's not the full solution. Yeah. I'd call it maybe 20% of the solution.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you're saying there, because I mean, let's talk a little bit about some of the features and accessibility that go into chat solutions. And I think that, I full transparency, I've partnered with Olark on a couple clients and have helped them implement a live chat solution and been very pleased with that. And I know that I was part of a beta test group on your mobile app, I think, 18 months ago or so. And so just help people understand, because I think sometimes there's misconceptions that, well, if we have a chat, somebody's got to be tied to their desktop, 24/7. Let's talk through that a little bit. What does that look like for an admissions team?
Yeah. So I think what you're talking about, like in particular, is maybe staffing. And I think staffing is ultimately like one of the biggest objections, like how am I actually going to staff this? And I think there's a couple things to keep in mind. Like many places are already picking up the phone when people call. They don't get very many phone calls, but there is people whose job it is to answer the phone when the phone rings. And you can think of chat as sort of in a similar way. Like if you have staff or even like a small call center of any form, chat is a good option there, because you can imagine that now, rather than just doing like one phone call with one person, you can chat with maybe 2 or 3 people at the same time and be fairly responsive. Generally speaking, we see a lot of like work study students used here, kind of, and admissions counselors, RAs, sort of more kind of student employees, I think, are very common to sort of work on that medium. It gives you flexible hours. It lets you kind of design around people's schedules in a way that like some of the other, on-campus jobs also do, but maybe not as much into the evenings. But additionally, like when someone's not there, you don't need to staff it 24/7. You don't staff much of anything 24/7 at a university.
Right.
And there's no reason you need to staff chat. I mean, you can hide it when you're not there. You can make an email contact form. There's many options, and that's pretty industry standard.
Right.
Very, very, very few places that are not enormously large are staffing things 24/7.
Let's talk a little bit about that idea of using students, because sometimes, and I'm just kind of reflecting back to you things I've heard about it when I've talked about live chat. It's like, well, students really don't know the answers to those questions. But I think your tools and a lot of tools, you can actually pre-configure some typical answers to the typical questions so that there's at least something to get started on. Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, I think, you can obviously have shortcuts and hints and things like that. But I also, I think thinking about it in 2 ways, right? One, there are some basic questions where you're just building trust.
Right.
These are basic questions where like a human is going to be better at engaging and having that back and forth dialogue than, a bot. And then there's also the opportunity to sort of transfer between departments. So for example, if you are, having a conversation with admissions, in many cases, admissions does not understand all the intricacies of financial aid. Even like, the employees in the admissions team, the counselors like that are trained and do this stuff every enrollment period. So the ability to kind of transfer over to an expert in another department, I think is a key feature to kind of help continue the conversation and get questions answered. And you can imagine that happening within, moving from, admissions to housing, or moving from, kind of across the organization.
Yeah. And speaking of that, that's been another one of the concerns that have been brought up to me, is the fact of, I might be talking to the admissions team about how important it is to have chat from an enrollment standpoint. I mean, I'm a big believer. If you know anything about me, you'll hear me talking about everything in your marketing needs to be from an enrollment focus first. And so the website needs to be enrollment focused and all that. So I would even say chat needs to be enrollment focused as much as possible first. But then I always hear people say, well, okay, we'll do that. But as soon as I put, the chat on the home page for enrollment, I'm going to get 6 people asking me about their transcripts. What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
And so tell me, I mean, obviously you've got bigger schools like University of Oregon. How are they handling that type of thing?
Yeah, I would say generally speaking, small schools might put it on their homepage and kind of look at it as sort of like, so oftentimes you'll staff out of registrar's office, like University of Montana, for example, not a small school, but they started off using OLARC primarily in their registrar's office, and their, dean of students had, a lot of good things to say about, just using it as a way of like getting things done a lot quicker than the in-person visits. But generally speaking, because the chat can be targeted, right? You can deploy it in a particular piece of your enrollment funnel that you're trying to optimize, and that's the way I always like talk to most schools that have traffic is like, think about what your goal is, right? Are you trying to increase your inquiries? Well, let's look at kind of the pages on your website that sort of lead towards that inquiry funnel, and let's like maybe make it a little easier to get that first touch point, kind of help you guys stand out a little bit. Do you have an online campus tour option? Like, for example, we recently partnered with Student Bridge, an online campus tour provider, to make sure that they could answer questions in real time via that platform that they've built. So I think thinking about your funnel, thinking about the pages in that funnel where you're trying to move someone through it. So inquiries, high intent pages on the website that lead towards inquiries, application completion. Obviously you can embed it inside of the Slate application experience if they're not using Common App. Right. You can also imagine like post submit. Okay, what are the sort of resources and website materials that people are navigating post submit? Let's embed chat there. Let's try to understand the questions people are asking and move people through that piece of the funnel. And you can kind of even look at that on the student success side. For example, we had UVA using us for their career center for just like career advising, because it was a way of like simplifying the ability for people to ask quick questions, get resume reviews, and sort of do that type of activity. So you can kind of think about chat as like, yes, like we all communicate, we all talk, but I think you can think about it in a more strategic way of saying like, okay, like let's look at the entire student journey from prospective to alumni, and let's look at the pieces inside that journey where we might want to like gain some information, like we might want to understand what's going on at that stage, or a place where we're trying to move a number, like trying to accomplish something, and let's deploy chat there, run some pilots, run some tests, and learn something. And I think that's generally where I like people to start, is just like with a goal and where they're trying to learn something. You can deploy it everywhere and you will learn something as well.
Right. That's a great point. And I love the fact that one of the things that I learned about OLARC is that I can kind of turn it on and off on different parts of the website, or have multiple accounts on different parts, so that there's some consistency with that. And so I think that's a great solution.
I also know that your platform has provided accessibility solutions customized for some of your colleges that you work with. One that comes to mind is Gallaudet University. Could you explain that and how that might affect how you move forward with solutions for other institutions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I appreciate you bringing that up, Troy. So one thing you should know about OLARC is, while we are, in this B2B space for a long time, as a company, we're incorporated as a public benefit corporation around accessible technology. And this is sort of an area of passion for us, and this area why we really like working with universities, because universities are some of our customers who care the most about accessibility, both from like the rational sense that they want everyone to have access to their university, to like kind of the more like cultural like benefit of like DEI and wanting to expand their enrollment base. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about higher ed. But to get more specific, when I think about design and building solutions, I think it's good to understand all of your constraints. And one of our customers is Gallaudet University, and Gallaudet University has a lot of students who come in who their primary language is American Sign Language. And so even though you can type back and forth using chat, if you're hearing impaired, you still like might have a better time expressing yourself using a different medium. And so one of the projects we're doing with them is, really thinking about chat as a medium that sort of lets you escalate to video conversations. So we're working with them to let you leave messages in American Sign Language to sort of escalate chats into real-time video conversations as well. And so I think, these are the kind of benefits you get when you kind of try to bring everyone under the same tent. Is it helps you build solutions for everyone, right? Because that kind of solution benefits, regardless of your ability, regardless of what university we're working with. Like, these are solutions we can bring to them as well, like asynchronous video messaging, escalation to video call. But I think that if you look at through the lens of trying to bring more people into the tent, working with, assistive technology offices, working with, kind of the assistive technology community, there's a lot of room to not tack on accessibility and build it in and just make it part of the core of how you solve problems. And that's one thing that's been super fun working at OLARC and been more exciting for us and working with more higher ed institutions recently.
That's great.
Are there any other similar solutions that you've provided for other schools?
So from an accessibility standpoint, I think generally speaking, we build like the customer facing chat experience, the experience that you see on every website. That's something that's been, heavily worked with accessibility offices from Berkeley, Harvard, and, a variety of others. Some of our corporate customers care a lot about that as well. And so I would just go back from the Assistive Technology Conference in Anaheim called CSUN, the California State Northridge. And it was pretty exciting to see, talks up there about accessible conversational UI and like little OLARC logos up there on into its talk about how to build this. And, I think it's an area that's been quite fun for us. It's really something that I think, gets everyone on the team like pretty excited working in that space. I've seen it like, it's funny because, and it's a little bit sad because if you kind of walk around, like CSUN is big, it's kind of like the biggest assistive technology conference. We sort of, when we had an exhibition booth there, and if people like kind of walk around, there's all these people who do accessibility auditing. Like there's a lot of auditors there. And when people stop by your booth, and they're like, "Yeah, you're like your guys' stuff is pretty good. Like we get flagged all the time." But the funny thing is, everyone says they're accessible. So it's like this sad state of affairs where like because you're selling in the higher ed or selling in government, like everyone's like, "Oh yeah, like we're accessible. We have all the certifications." Right. But I think that in general, once you dive deeper into that, like a lot of people are approaching accessibility as a sort of a check the box functionality, and not like let's actually build something that's incredibly usable for a lot of people. And I don't know, it's I think there's a big opportunity out there for technologists and universities to embrace that a little bit more and make it easier for people to get in there, not just make it like kind of like we don't want to get sued kind of standpoint, right, but more of a like, let's figure out how to actually make this thing easier for everyone. Because I think that, like a curb cut, right, like on a sidewalk, yeah, it's great for someone in a wheelchair, but if you're pushing a stroller or you're biking around your kids, like these types of enhancements benefit everyone, and they're not just like something as a risk assessment problem.
Good.
We talk a lot about it on the show. Schools are really struggling today to make the same ad spend work. CPMs are up 89% year over year on Facebook and Instagram. Our college clients are no longer looking for rented audiences. They're looking for an own community where they can engage students even before they apply. This is why Zemi has become so crucial for our clients. With over 1 million students, close to 10,000 five-star ratings, consistently ranked as one of the top social apps, and recently one of Apple's hot apps of the week, there simply isn't anything out there like it, and we have seen it all. Zemi not only provides the best space for student engagement, but the most unique and actionable data for their 160 college and university partners. We know firsthand from our clients that Zemi is a must-have strategy for Gen Z. Check them out now at colleges.zemi.com. That's colleges.zeemee.com. And yes, tell them Bart and Troy sent you. We close each episode by asking our guest, related to their industry and the solutions that they provide, would there be a quick tip or a piece of advice that they could give our marketing audience that they could implement soon after listening or immediately? Do you have any secrets that you've been holding back that you can share?
That's a great question. So I would say, with Olark, live chat, or any solution like that, it does not take that long to deploy and start learning. Like it's as simple as adding like a little piece of code to your website. Like we put together a checklist for enrollment folks. You can get it at olark.com/ed checklist or edu checklist. And that'll kind of go through some of the things I talked about, like helping define goals and figure out staffing and, some sort of walking those problems through. And I think that it's often adding something to the website feels a little bit daunting. Often sort of experimenting within your customer journey feels a little bit daunting. And especially inside these big institutions with so many different, people that control different little pieces of that funnel. I think that one way of thinking about just doing business on the internet and connecting with Gen Z is that like you got to be there. You got to be like where people are, right, during that process. So if you're, sitting in your office, your on-campus office, right, waiting for the phone to ring, or obviously admission counselors are out doing all these events all the time. But when people are in that application process and that consideration phase, they're on their phones, they're looking at websites, they are at their home filling out applications. And I think, if you want to learn what that experience is like from their perspective, like the easiest thing to do is make it very easy to get in touch and start like experimenting. And I think that I would recommend that anyone that listens to this, whether you're using us or some other provider, like the ability to communicate with someone as they're moving through a process that you've designed and they're trying to optimize is incredibly valuable, especially when they're in the moment of doing that process. Not like hey, let me send you a text message to try to move you through the process, but like they're literally on your site evaluating your university and trying to figure out if this is the place that they want to go to. Like if you can be there and build that relationship and create that sense of belonging and show them why you're a little bit different than some of the other institutions that also have web pages and build like a little bit of a connection, it can be incredibly valuable to that one individual, but also incredibly valuable to your insight into what's happening in that process. So that would be my main takeaway is it's not that hard to run a little test and start learning.
Thank you, Ben. Love that response. For our listeners who would like to reach out and contact you, may have questions, what would be the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, well, I'm super easy to get in touch with. You can email me, just ben@olark.com. Probably if you want to ensure, like I get a lot of email. If you want to ensure that like I'm on it and I get back to you, if you just went to olark.com and chatted with someone on our team, like and just said, hey, like, I heard this podcast. I want to, chat with them more. Like those guys have a really good control over my calendar, and I listen to everything our customer service and our customer facing teams flag. You can also ping me on LinkedIn. I'm very responsive on LinkedIn. Email is probably the place where I get, it may not be the best way, but I'll do my best. I'll do my best to find it.
Fair enough.
Very good. Thank you, Ben. I've loved this conversation, and I think live chat is very valuable for the higher ed community at this time. Bart, any last parting words or thoughts from you?
Yeah, I just wanted to I always like to take and tease out a little bit of some things that I heard that I just think are really it's like taking a highlighter to it or just underlining something that we've talked about. And so a couple of things, especially just this last comment that Ben made about the idea of, being willing to try some things out, trying to learn something. I'm reminded of a quote by Alvin Toffler that says the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read, but they'll be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn again. And I think that's so true when we talk about technology, when we talk about all kinds of things, is that it's very dynamic. It's very fluid. A lot of things are changing. And I think that being successful means that you've got to be willing to kind of get out there and and take advantage of things when they're going on. Too many times, especially in higher education, we do things because we've always done it that way. And we can't do that with Generation Z. We can't do that with millennials in the way that we market to them. And so I think that, part of what Ben talked about is so critical in there. And I also really liked what he said about, be where they are. We've talked to so many other people on this podcast, whether it's Adam Metcalf at ZME, with the idea of being able to, have conversations with students, having peer-to-peer conversations on their app. You're basically putting your school where they are. They're in social media app in that particular thing. We've also talked with Ethan Butte at BombBomb. The idea of having video, email, and you think about the different ways that it all comes down to relationship, is what I'm trying to point out. Is whether you're using Unibuddy, ZME, Olark, BombBomb, it comes down to relationship and being able to do relationship where people are. And I think that we all know that face-to-face is probably the most effective relationship. And then it gets to, video conferencing is kind of a second place area. But then you start getting down into, chat is going to be much more personable than a live chat's going to be more personable than email. And video email is more personal than email. Email is kind of the default now, but I think there's a lot of other ways that we can really get more relationship and a lot more trust building with some of these other tools and these other technologies. And so don't take them for granted to just say, oh, we don't need that. It's another tool in your arsenal that I think you really need to look at. And I really appreciate Ben being on the show today to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you both for those wonderful parting shots. The Higher Ed Marketer podcast is sponsored by Kaler Solutions, an education marketing and branding agency, and by Think Patented, a marketing execution company combining printing and mailing for higher ed outreach solutions. On behalf of my co-host Bart Kaler, I'm Troy Singer. Thank you for joining us.
You've been listening to The Higher Ed Marketer. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you're listening with Apple Podcasts, we'd love for you to leave a quick rating of the show. Simply tap the number of stars you think the podcast deserves. Until next time.